Our scripture this morning comes from the Gospel of Matthew, and Jesus is continuing his journey towards Jerusalem, and he's stopping and teaching along the way. So this is another parable that he's telling his disciples. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard. About 9 in the morning, he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing, and he told them, "You also go work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. He went out again about noon, and about 3 in the afternoon, and did the same thing. About 5 in the afternoon, he went out and found still others standing around. He asked them, "Why have you been standing here all day doing nothing?" "Because no one has hired us," they answered. He said to them, "You also go work in my vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first." The workers who were hired about 5 in the afternoon came, and each received a denarius. So when those came who were hired first, they expected to receive more. But each one of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. "These who were hired last worked only 1 hour," they said, "and you have made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day." But he answered one of them, "I'm not being unfair to you. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous? So the last will be first, and the first will be last." The word of God for the people of God. May the Spirit add a blessing to our understanding of it. I like your sermon, Bonnie, and if it's like our house, it's BL, no T. So like the tomato, trust is always difficult. Believing and loving is easy, but that trust and that tomato. So, you hear this story, and what do you think? It's what that guy says. It's not fair. For those of us that have been around children, have you ever heard that before? Sure you have. All the time. Well, to get our minds prepared for this little parable and sermon, a couple of these fantastic cartoons from Angus Day. This parable bugs me. The first guys get totally ripped off. You don't know, you think about all the people Jesus called. You and I have come late in the day. Oh, I love this parable. And then one more, same cartoon. Every time I read this story, it's unfair all over again. The reign of God isn't fair, it's merciful. Is that supposed to make you feel better? Well, it all depends on whether you need mercy or not. So we hear this all the time. Life is not fair. You can hear it in the workers. If you remember, denarius is used for a day's pay. If you need to think of it in today's terms, I think we talked in a few parables a couple of weeks ago that equated it to about $50. So the workers are getting their handouts, and you can see it. They're all lined up. The last people that work for an hour are getting a day's pay. Those that work from 3 are getting the same pay, and noon. And the people in the end are the workers that have worked all day in the vineyard. And they have to be thinking to themselves, there's going to be a nice bonus in this for me. Everyone else is getting a day's pay for not doing as much work as I did, so I certainly deserve more. Then the landowner has his foreman hand them $50. And you can almost hear it. It is not fair. Of course it isn't fair. We as Christians, as people, love grace and mercy as long as it's directed towards us and towards the people that we approve of. As long as it's not so lavish that it's going to embarrass us. Well, I have 2 sons, 8 and 11. And sometimes it's a lot of refereeing because they have a very fully developed and acute sense of what's fair and not fair. And if there is a perceived unfairness, holy smokes, it's not fair. If I'm in my right mind, and I don't bring out the wooden spoon, or whatever it takes to keep him quiet, I might say, you're right, it's not fair. And then, I'll give him some words of advice that my dad always said, life's not fair. Get used to it now, it's easier. Well, we're just like the kids. We have a very acute sense of what's fair and unfair, especially when it comes to what we deserve. I wonder if God kind of looks the same way. Hopefully God doesn't ever have the feeling to bring out the wooden spoon when we're feeling that we are being cheated or it's not fair. But when God pours love and grace and mercy upon someone else, we sometimes think it's unfair. Especially with someone that we don't think deserve it. Haven't worked as hard for it. It's really not fair. Well, this parable has been used often to talk about fairness. A lot of times it's used as an allegory for salvation, meaning Jesus is telling them a nice little story using a metaphor that in the end everyone has a chance at salvation. Eternal with God, heaven with Jesus. So it's kind of easy to look at it that way, right? You kind of look at it and think, well, everyone gets a chance to say yes or no to their relationship with God, and in the end it doesn't matter if you're the first or the last, because as that one cartoon said, in the whole story of God and his people, we're kind of latecomers. We think of the Jewish folk first, and then even the Gentiles around Jesus' time, and now us, we're late in the day. So maybe it's a feel-good story. Yeah, we get included too, just as much as they do. You've heard the old joke of the Methodist or the Catholic or the Protestant or whoever going to heaven and saying, you know, be quiet as you walk past the rooms because they think they're the only ones here. So if we look at the parable that way, it's pretty easy to swallow, right? That's okay teaching. Everyone gets a chance at salvation. Well, if you look at the parable closely, I don't think that's what Jesus is saying at all. Because the landowner doesn't change the situation. If you have to imagine, these people are lined up. Day laborers who don't have steady jobs or steady income. They show up every morning hoping to find a job to feed their family for the day. In the end of the parable, they don't go home to a mansion. They don't go home to a full-paying job. They go home with a day's pay. They'll be there the next day, hoping to get hired again. Now, we don't know if the manager hires them all again the same way, or if the manager says, I'm only taking so much for my vineyard, or when the harvest is done, he doesn't have work for them. It's not only a parable about our relationship or our salvation, if you will. It's a parable about justice, about what God chooses to do, what God chooses to value, and what we choose to value. The parable doesn't fix the situation. It simply illuminates that we don't share the same values that God does. We place value on work, right? What can I accomplish? What have I done to deserve this? God places value on the person. That's what that parable teaches us. The parable had nothing to do with the amount of work they did for the day. The parable simply was that landowner chose to value the person based on who they were. So whether we're speaking of a first century field hand or a 21st century peasant in Central America or a single mother working a minimum wage job with no benefits, the parable of Matthew 20, a writer says, arouses indignation among those of us whose needs are already met. Appealing to the economics of fairness, the writer goes on, we find reasons why the poor are poor, why our own level of comfort is justified, and why we ought to be passionate that they only get what they deserve. But God tells us there's a new way. There is a better way of valuing things. But our notions of fairness get in the way. And they're influenced by our own judgments on who's deserving, how much they're deserving of, what they need to do to get more. So along comes just this parable and says, that's not the way God looks at things. This parable is about generosity. And we don't do generosity well. In fact, we have an inherent resistance to even giving it or receiving it. Maybe more of a resistance to receiving generosity. Because we anticipate, uh-oh, what am I going to have to do to pay this back? Right? Or we assume I didn't do anything to deserve this generosity. This would belong to somebody else. If I were to show up in your door tomorrow morning and hand you $1,000 and say, do what you want with it, would you simply shake my hand and say, thank you, and spend it? Or would your thought be like mine would be, what does Pastor want? Is this a trick? Am I supposed to give it back to the church? Or, how am I going to pay Pastor back for this? Right? How am I going to make this debt even? So we relegate generosity to equality, right? To accountability, to measurability. We need to know, how do we make this fair? Because it's not fair if someone just gives you something. We automatically feel guilty, right? We don't take things well. We don't receive them well because we feel like we're indebted to that person then. We owe them something back. This is the parable that reminds us that the absolute gift of generosity does not demand response, does not account for reciprocity, does not calculate what can be given back. Generosity is given freely. True generosity wants nothing in return. Think about when you give. Hopefully, you don't want something in return. And that's the point of this parable. God's grace and love is generous. It can't be counted. It can't be measured. It can't be labeled as something that we deserve or something that we earn. Generosity, grace in its truest form, cannot be defined or determined by anything that we value. And that's where it gets hard for us. Because it's God's will to give. But it hurts our values of what's fair, our value of what is justice. We learn a little bit more about God as we travel a little deeper in this story. We have to ask about who receives the extravagance from the landowner. Some people will kind of look at this parable and say it's a story about the people that worked in the church. People that have toiled away for the ministry of the church for years upon years, and people that have just come new to the church. But I think that this story about workers that receive a day's pay showing up at 5 o'clock go past whether people sleep in on Sunday morning or come to church on Sunday morning. This is a parable that illuminates kind of the dynamics of economic life. Who do we think a landowner encounters when he goes to hire people for the day? What kind of people are last to find jobs? Nothing suggests that these people are responsible or lazy. More likely, they're people that are unwanted. Who would spend a whole day sitting around waiting to be hired and the last ones to be picked? Who are the people you pick last for a game if you're going to play? You don't pick the strongest. You don't pick the best athletes. You pick the people youth, right? You pick them first. You don't leave them for last. So maybe these people that are sitting around they aren't the cream of the crop at the end, right? The people that are usually looked over, the poor, the outcast, the widow, the orphan. But if we were to compile a list of people who don't get picked to work, who would be fit on that list? But who else would we say doesn't deserve the same shot at the day's pay? People are lazy, right? If you can't make it in life, pull up your bootstraps and get to work. If they just would work harder, they'd get what they needed, what they deserved. We tend to start to make qualifications for people who don't or can't make it in life. But this parable asks us, where do we draw the line then on what's fair and not fair? About who we love? About, more importantly, who do we help? I think that's the meaning of this parable. We aren't allowed to say, oh, it's easy to just love them. Yeah, love is great, but love also is action. Faith is action. So we're challenged to look at this parable and say that everyone needs a shot at what we have in life. spiritually, physically, emotionally. And it isn't about being fair at all, at least in terms of the way we deserve, or we define fair. Think about it. Would you want God to be fair with you? If God's blessings, if our relationship, if our salvation with God depended on our own good works, how good we could be, would we want God to be fair with us? Would we want to get what we deserve? If we take a look at our lives, would we say we were good enough to earn God's forgiveness and grace and love? We worked that hard. We're that good a person. I couldn't say that. So where do we draw the line? If we have limits, if we have an idea of what's fair, then we have to have in our mind, we need to do this, this, and this to get God's love. Or we say to this other person who maybe hasn't experienced the same level of care that we have, well, you need to do this, this, and this to experience God's love. You need to be this good. Or do it this way. We start to draw lines. Or we start to say, well, I do it because I've worked hard and I deserve it. Maybe. Maybe you were born in the right time in the right place. Maybe it's got not much to do with actually who you are, but where you are. And those that can't, or don't have the same benefits and blessings that we do, we tend to write them off because they're X, Y, or Z. Fill it in the blanks. And we start to think they just haven't worked hard enough. They haven't done this or that. And then when we see them blessed or we see them receive something, that's not fair. They didn't deserve that. They didn't work as hard as I have for that. Well, guess what? God values no one like that. God values us and them simply because we are children of God. We tend to value on what people can do for us or what people can do, the work that they did. God values them simply because they're people of God. So this parable doesn't dissolve these issues that plague us. Economic injustice, our unwillingness to really share where it hurts. Nor does it promise tomorrow that everything will be fixed. But if we think about who needs help the most, how might a society that talks about justice for all really look at helping all that need justice? What if we look at the kind of people that need God's desire or God's love and generosity the most? In the end, this isn't a story about unfair payments. The full workers don't mean that they've been cheated. They were given what they were promised. But their complaint is that you have made them equal to us. Right? Those that didn't work as hard as we did received the same thing we did. They're equal to us now in the eyes of God. And by God, that's not fair. I worked harder for that. I deserve more. And God says, frankly, no, you don't. I don't value that. I value you. And that's the way I want you to look at the world. So our challenge becomes, how do we help? There is probably 1,000 ways each one of us could go and help someone who's less fortunate than us. But we make good excuses why we don't. I just came across a challenge that is truly a first world problem. We're supposed to go to Puerto Rico on vacation. Obviously, we're not going to Puerto Rico on vacation when the devastation hit there. So now we're trying to plan, where else are we going to go? And we get to cancel the house and change flights with no penalties or whatsoever. So as I'm preparing this sermon, it hits me. We're just going to pretend like nothing happened down there for those poor people. So it hits me, maybe we can go somewhere here in the States a little cheaper and take the savings we were going to have in challenging where we're going to stay. You know, we had a budget set for Puerto Rico. We can go somewhere cheaper in the U.S. Maybe take those savings and send it to disaster relief in Puerto Rico. So I put that out there to our group, and one of the responses was, I don't want to do that. It's going to cut into my budget, and why would we go on vacation if we can't do what I want to do? I thought exactly. Why sacrifice for somebody else? That's usually the response we have when we're asked to help. Well, I will as long as it doesn't hurt too much. Or I will if that person looks like me, kind of comes from where I come from, kind of will work, or I know they're going to put it to good use. Because we place value on what they can do, what they have done, what they might do with what we're asked to challenge or what we're asked to give. Luckily for us, God doesn't. God looks at each person and says, I value you. And that's where he challenges us. If we truly are a place that says that justice for all and everyone deserves a shot, then we who have a shot need to help those that don't. And even those we think that certainly don't deserve it, because God truly cares for the poor, the widow, the orphan. And he wants us to care too. And he wants us to care to where it hurts a little bit. That's the challenge before us with this parable. Where does God need us? And it's not going to be fair. At least not the way we value things.